In this video, we'll discuss why the human race, the human beings, became insane and how to get out of it. Hello, this is Chris speaking, Shores of Infinity, with another video about Aurobindo's The Life Divine. This is a very practical chapter of how to get out of ignorance into knowledge and enlightenment. It is called Out of the Sevenfold Ignorance Towards the Sevenfold Knowledge, chapter 19 of book 2 of the Life Divine. And he basically explains that the human beings, the human race has become insane, crazy, mad. And that was 100 years ago. Everything that is true about what happened 100 years ago is much more true nowadays. Firstly, he says we have an obsession with the sense mind. Obsession with matter and the sense mind. The sense mind is that part of the mind that interprets our senses. The senses are also part of it, the 5 main senses, like seeing, hearing, tasting, and so on, but also interpreting what they mean. And we're obsessed with it. That's why we're also obsessed with physics and chemistry and technology. And why we think that technology will save us. Like, look at Elon Musk, one of the most intelligent people alive. He thinks that the way out is to colonize Mars. It's okay to destroy the planet, but no, that's not what he says. But he's already working on plan B. It's not necessary to work on a plan B. We can stay here on the planet, but we have to get out of this OCD. We basically have an OCD of matter and sense mind. It's like someone who's washing his or her hands all the time and claims that this is the most important thing that all human beings have to do. It's not wrong, but it's definitely not one of the most important things. It's a tiny aspect. Hygiene is not bad, but if you make it the thing and everything else is, you deny that it exists, that will lead to ignorance. So first step is to get out of this OCD, or out of this identification with the sense, mind, and matter. It's okay to be interested in mathematics and physics and chemistry and technology and informatics and stuff, but it's not the most important thing. It's definitely not the only thing in existence. The second thing is, he says, the conquest of our constitutional ignorance cannot be complete if we have not conquered our psychological ignorance. So that's the next. After having realized that matter is not everything and our usual 5 senses is not everything and does not describe and perceive everything, the next thing is to look inside and do some psychological re-evaluation. This is what I usually refer to as trauma therapy. But it goes, for Sri Aurobindo, this goes much further. He talks about the superficial stream of our being, which is the conscient self, the conscient waking self, the self that we usually call awake, which is not awake. It is a constant babble. We reaffirm our view of material reality all the time in repeating stuff. It's a self-hypnosis. The way out of it is to stop the internal dialogue, as Carlos Castaneda put it. So that's the next step. First step, disengage from our sole focus of matter and senses. Stop running around with a magnifying glass. Look at the big picture. And be open that there's more to reality than what you can sense with your 5 senses. And also more to reality than logic. Second, psychological re-evaluation. Stop the babble, stop the talking in your head. and do some trauma therapy. The next step is to get in contact with our energetical being. There's a secret being made of energy that is half manifest. It's imperfect. It's subliminal and not yet fully come into being. It's like a baby, basically. Our energy body is like a baby, and we have to get into contact with it and train it. At the same time, in the subtle sphere and the vital sphere, we always have to be careful not to play around too much with energies and beings. The next step is to explore the unconscious. The unconscious or subconscious have to become conscious to some degree. All the stuff that usually is automatic and functioning by itself more or less well, we have to not be able to control it, but we have to be aware of it, that it's not just happening without our knowledge, that we can observe it, bring it to the surface, so that we are not just some mechanical thing, mechanical subhuman animal, but a conscious human being that is really perceiving the world and everything that's happening in it. To get out of this comatose torpor, how he calls it, into a real mental activity. The mind has many activities and forms and aspects and levels, and we usually concentrate on the lowest level, which is the sense mind. But the mind can do so much more. There was recently a question in the Patreon group about the mind, if the mind is all bad. Parts of the mind are all bad, basically, but parts of the mind are not. But we have to go through that step to see that the mind is usually a problem. But it's not that we descend into the unconscious, because then we would lose the plot. We become aware. We lift it up a little bit. And then he has two more interesting terms, intraconscient and circumconscient. So there's not only a subconscious, but an intraconscient and circumconscient. And with those, we can further dissect our sense mind and our vital and subtle being. Now we can really become aware of what is happening. What is this human body and human energy construct actually doing? How does it function? And we have learned before in previous chapters that the main function for the body and what we call the mind in our energy system is to protect ourselves from cosmic currents, shocks, waves, and so on. So we cannot just turn off this protection mechanism. Otherwise we might be incinerated or get seriously ill. So it's not the purpose to turn it off, it's the purpose to become aware of it, to become conscious of it, to be able to perceive it, and to not only mechanically exist on the surface. We can affect our existence and knowledge. Affected and affected. But once we have scrutinized all these automatical, unconscious or intraconscious parts, then we can finally get rid of this illusion to be separate somehow. That's our main problem. The main problem is that we think that we are separate from the rest, from the whole. And as long as we are in this delusion that we're individuals separate from the rest, no progress is possible. And in a way this is true. We are separate because we have these protection mechanisms against cosmic rays, for example. But that also hampers and truncates us. So we have to find a way to be still protected and at the same time to realize that we are part of one big whole thing. And then only we have agency. Until then, we are automatic thingies, like robots. Worse than animals, basically. But once we bring the darkness into the light and are able to observe it, then real evolution can start, real thinking can start. It's like Gurdjieff's Kundabuffa organ. Yeah? We are hobbled like horses, where you tie the legs up. We cannot walk and talk and think and feel properly. We cannot function properly because we are hampered. We are limited. We have to turn off this Kundabuffa organ, this automatic stuff that limits it to some degree. To some degree we can turn it off, and to some degree it's enough to become conscious of it, to observe it and just see what's happening, how it's working. And then only we have the potential to reach up to the superconscious, which is our goal. Our goal as human beings is to evolve and to get into contact with the superconscious. But first we have to get rid of this OCD that only matter exists and only our sense mind exists and is the only way to deal with our environment. We have talked the last time and in several other videos about peak experiences. Usually on the way, on the spiritual path, there are peak experiences, and then you go down again and up again, down again and up again. There's no continuity usually. And this continuity, this widening, this going up and then widening, not only to stand on a pinnacle, on a peak, on a small point above the clouds, but to really open up a wide space up there in the mental plane. That is possible if we prepare properly. And then we can really understand what space is, what time is, or what the ancients called immortality. Immortality doesn't mean immortality of the body. So many people now, the more stupid they are, the more they look for some way to prolong their lives. That's not it. It's a spiritual immortality. To see the perpetuity in eternal time. Birth becoming non-birth, non-becoming. The changelessness that is there also in the universe and that we can access also. And then we can also see what the purpose of the ego is. The ego is a protection mechanism, but unfortunately is also a falsification mechanism and a limiting mechanism. So it has something to do with the soul. Sri Aurobindo is one of these philosophers and sages and enlightened beings who talks about a higher self. For him, the soul is the higher self. The soul is the part that has a connection to the whole, to the divine, to the absolute. And the ego is just a shadow of it, a small perverted semblance of the soul. So it is necessary in the beginning, but later we don't need the ego so much anymore. And we can let loose the spirit. Let loose the spirit! But this is only possible once the ego starts to collapse. And these walls of separation with this unity fall into nothingness. This is a scary process. This is what every seeker is looking for, but actually it's a horrible, scary process that when you're there, you wish you've never gone that way. But it ends at some point, and then the spirit is revealed and our divine cosmic nature. And we can glimpse then a part of the divine plan, which is, in Sri Aurobindo terms, cosmic evolution of consciousness. He writes here, the true individual, the spiritual being emerges, individual yet universal, universal yet self-transcendent. Life no longer appears as a formation of things and an action of being created by the separative ignorance. Yeah, so I'm not a really big fan of the word enlightenment, because it sounds, if you're brainwashed by religion, it sounds like a choir of angels singing and then you're raised up into heaven. That's not it. What it is to come out of darkness into light. From a Upanishadic and Vedic and Sri Aurobindonian perspective, it's out of the darkness into the light. Meaning, out of the inconscient and subconscious into conscience, into becoming aware of what is actually happening. This is possible. Now, Sri Aurobindo is not one who says we have to wait until we die. He says we can do it here now. But remember that the first step is to give up this obsession with matter and our sense mind. That is the first important step, and probably no one does that. Most people are still trying to bring these two together. Yeah, it's a good first step to occupy yourself with matter, how matter seems to work from a physical perspective. Once you have understood that to some degree, just leave it be. I mean, if that's your work, okay. But otherwise, just leave it alone. You will not bring these two together. You have to abandon it to explore new fields of reality. You have more than 5 senses, and there's more than logical thinking. If you limit yourself to that, you limit yourself to a tiny speck of possibilities, and no progress will be necessary. You will run in circles, which is what most spiritual seekers do. We are brainwashed by religion and we are brainwashed by natural sciences. And both of that we have to give up. There can be no more brainwashing. It will only lead to ignorance. And then we have to dig deeper into psychology and to find those parts that go beyond the sense mind. Right now what we experience is some kind of tyranny. We experience life as a tyranny of life and matter over us. Or some also who have psychological problems might experience life as a tyranny of the mind. All these three, matter, life and mind, what we usually experience are only tiny fractions of the possibility, and we have to shine a light into the darkness and then emerge into the light. As first we have to look into the darkness. That is what, for example, in Spiral Dynamics is coral. That is the explanation why coral is necessary after turquoise. You have to go into the darkness first. You have to explore all the weird stuff that is happening inside of you. Why you are limiting yourself. And then only you can stop limiting yourself. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you for watching, listening, subscribing. Hit the like button, thumbs up. Thank you for joining me on Patreon, and thank you especially to those who have already joined me on Patreon and are supporting this channel. Thank you very much. See you soon.